Hallo und herzlich willkommen zum Call to Action Podcast. Hier der Online-Verkaufs-Podcast von Digital Beat. Normalerweise hört ihr mich ja nur in Schon gehört mit der netten Denise, aber heute wird es was ganz Neues für euch geben. Mein Name ist wie immer Jan und ich bin heute mit dem Head of International Media Management, Gerhard Louw, von der Deutschen Telekom, und gleich werde ich mit ihm auf Englisch ein cooles Interview führen über die Themen Data-Driven Marketing. Also, ihr kennt das ja alle im digitalen Marketing, dass man viel ausprobiert, viel testet, aber das Ganze dann eventuell auch mal ein bisschen datenbasierter macht und da wirklich mal analytisch dran geht. Eine klitzekleine Sache, bevor es losgeht, die ich noch sagen möchte. Es freut mich natürlich, dass ihr zuhört, allerdings haben wir hier gerade ein paar Bauarbeiten im Haus und falls ihr im Hintergrund so ein bisschen Bohren hört, dann bitte ich das zu entschuldigen und ich hoffe trotzdem, dass wir das vielleicht noch in der Nachbearbeitung rausfiltern können. Auf jeden Fall viel Spaß beim Podcast und los geht's.
Call to Action, der Online-Verkaufspodcast von Digital Beat.
Hi Gerhard, first of all, thanks for making it to Cologne. I also have to say it's my first podcast in English, and you told me in the conversation we had before that's your first podcast overall.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jan. Thanks firstly for the invitation. I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk about marketing and online marketing and data. Yeah, I've done many keynote presentations and I'm on panels quite regularly, but I've never done a podcast. So a first for me and a first for you. That's good.
Then a quick question at the start. Do you actually listen to podcasts yourself?
I must be honest, no.
Okay.
So maybe you can show me afterwards how it works.
Definitely. You can maybe even listen to the Call to Action podcast. Who knows?
Sure.
So we were talking before. When I got the news or the message that you were visiting us or actually coming to the podcast, the first thing that I thought is, okay, so I have someone who is basically in media management or even the head of media management is this well-known, worldwide known company, Telekom. I think every one of the listeners will know the company, and I probably even think that every one of the listeners will already have used one of your products or services. So for me, the first or the most important thing would be just if you could quickly introduce yourself, what do you do there, and then the next step would be just what your typical day would be like.
Sure. Great. Thanks, Jan. So I think people don't necessarily know what media means, right? Everything is media. Is media an ad? Yes, that's also part of media. Or is media a newspaper? If you read newspaper, I don't know if anyone still does, but there are still some people out there. Or is it a TV program? Is that media? Is a press release media? I think media is, of course, a very wide definition. But the way that we look at media and the way that I look media, it is about advertising and it's about communicating to our audiences. Okay. And there are always two aspects to let's say, to advertising, to communication. There's the what we say, so you can think of that as the content, as the creative aspect, as the message. So there's something we want to transport, some kind of message, and then there's the where. So the where is where am I when I hear the message, when I read the message, when I see the message. So that is normally what we define as media. It is that where, defining how we reach our audience, at what stage, at what moment and in what stage they are in and what phase they are in. So that's really what we talk about media as the where of advertising and of communication. And I work with all the markets that Deutsche Telekom has businesses in. So you might know that T-Mobile is one of the brands. Yeah. Also Telecom is one of the is the main brand, and we have 13 countries within Europe where we have big, large telecommunication businesses, like in Germany, and then of course also the US with T-Mobile US. So I work with these colleagues on a daily basis in terms of this question: where should we invest our money? Where should we invest our media budget to make sure our audiences see, hear, and feel our messages and our brand?
The where could be, for example, a specific marketing channel, like let's say a social network, or it could be a platform. Okay,
exactly.
Okay, got it.
Exactly. So, I mean, this is a digital marketing podcast. Yeah. So if we talk about the digital side, of course, there are also within digital many where questions. I mean, if we look at this, probably the biggest part of where in digital is probably search. Yeah. So if I look at where we spend most of our budget. Within the digital part, it is definitely search, but it is, of course, also display. It is very wide, from whether it is, let's say, classical banners on websites, whether it is video in video portals, video sites, video environments. But of course, there are also many other places where we place advertising in the digital space, and there are also different ways, of course, to buy this media, whether it's direct buying, direct bookings, or whether it's programmatic, etc. But social media, of course, is a very crucial part also of this digital puzzle. So a large portion of the budget, a large portion of the where gets answered by social media.
And so for me, the cool thing or the interesting thing is for me that you come from a really big company. So usually when we talk to people, they are either talking about either search, or they're talking about display, or maybe social media. They always are really focused on one thing, because the companies or the people that listen to a podcast mostly are not big enough to actually do everything well, because they simply don't have the manpower. And for me, the most interesting question is, how would the process start? When you say where, would someone basically, or like the what team, the communications team, come up with a communication? This will then get transferred to your department. Then I'm just really interested in the process, how you facilitate that.
Sure. I think one has to think of different things, but let's talk about big campaigns, because that's of course where a lot of our focus is and a lot of our work goes in there, and a big part of the budget gets spent there. So the way that campaigns normally work is there's always a business objective or a business problem. So let's think of a new product. Let's think of a new service. Let's think of a change in the pricing of that product or service. Let's think of a repositioning. Let's think of a completely new offering to the market. Let's think of something like smart home, for example, which is one of our products, and also services involved where people can manage their homes in terms of, let's say, the heating, opening and closing the windows, the security aspect, etc. So the question is always, the task always starts with the question, what do we want to achieve? And it's normally on a business level. So we want to inform our target audience of the new product, or we want to promote the product, we want to sell the product, etc. It could be any of those or a combination of those. So that's normally where we start off. And then the what and where questions are always worked on simultaneously. So we have different partners where we worked on the what question, and different partners where we worked on the where question, right? And they normally work independently but also jointly. So we have very long processes. It also depends from company to company. So our processes might necessarily be shorter than a car manufacturer, for example, where they know what the cars will be like in 2 years that they're going to launch, and maybe they start working 2 years before. Our cycles are much smaller or shorter, I would say.
Could you specify that? Could you even say that?
Yeah, I would say if it's something really big and something really new, we would definitely spend at least 3, 4, even 5 months on that.
Oh, okay.
If it's just a relaunch of an existing product, it's much shorter, or a change in the pricing, it would be much shorter even as well. So I think it depends. There's not necessarily one rule, but if it's really something new, something really big that requires a lot of thinking and a lot of alignment, then we start, let's say, 3 or 4 months before.
That's actually pretty interesting, because I think most listeners of the podcast will think that in those big companies, the process takes way longer. I think 3, 4, 5 months actually doesn't sound that long to me. I think when we compare to our processes here, when we have, let's say, an event which takes place in March, the marketing planning already starts also at least 6 to 9 months before, just simply because we don't have the manpower to do it shorter before. And then when you just said it's quite similar, the numbers, then it actually makes me think, oh wow, those big companies are way more dynamic than I personally always thought, and maybe some of the listeners thought too.
I mean, it also, of course, relates to business pressure. You know, there's always pressure, the business goals that need to be achieved, and they always are much shorter than one would have liked to. Of course, it's nicer to have a long time, but I think our industry is also very fast. It changes a lot. New products, new services change all the time. Technology changes all the time. So I would say that is in our industry probably shorter than than other industries. I mean, think of pharmaceutical, for example. How long does it take to develop a new drug, to get it through the testing, to get it admission in the different authorities? So that's really, I mean, that could be like a 4 or 5 year project, right? So in our lives, it's just a little bit shorter. So then we have this sort of what and where are teams that work on these questions. And within that process, then there are just lots and lots of alignment, lots and lots of exchanging of different processes. So it starts off very strategic. What do we want to achieve? Then it talks about how can we achieve this? So then you would do things like a target audience analysis. You would look at a communication analysis. You would look at competitors. You would look at history that we've communicated in this area before. So there's a lot of analysis that gets done, that gets shared. And then from there, the next stage would be to define the strategy. So what are we going to do? How are we going to approach this project? You could even then at that stage already start thinking about what we call a media mix or a channel mix. Yeah. So is it going to be only digital? Is it going to be digital plus above the line media like TV, radio, out of home, for example? Those kind of decisions need to be done quite early in the process, because then the what as well needs to be developed according to that. So if you're going to do a big TV shoot, that needs a lot of time and planning, and of course the concept needs to be developed in that way.
So it just sounded to me that for you also the planning and the analysis before actually deciding the what or the where is the most important or the most crucial part?
Exactly. I think so, because, you know, I mean, I used to work in the advertising industry as well. I used to work in an advertising agency. And, you know, that's, of course, for someone working in an agency, that's often the most exciting part. The brief is there and we need to come up with new ideas. The client is open to, you know, getting very creative ideas, new ideas, something they haven't seen before. That's, let's say, for many people, the exciting part. And that is, of course, a great part, but that's just a small part of the whole process. So especially in a big organization like Deutsche Telekom, there's a lot of alignment that needs to happen between the guys managing the commercial side, so, you know, the finances and the objectives and the goals, between the guys managing the creative process and the communication part, the what part, and then of course the media guys and having to answer the where part. So there are lots of different stakeholders that need to align again and again and again throughout the process. So it's not a case of, oh, here's a brief, guys, go and work on something, we'll have a look at it in 4 weeks and then see where we are. I think that's maybe the perception that people think it works like that. It certainly doesn't. Of course, in the process, there are those phases where the agencies and the partners then really work on their part and come up with new ideas and creative ideas. But it's just a small part of the total process.
So for me, it feels like, is there one, let's say, big meeting or something where everyone brings together their analysis parts and then you kind of present it and then the next step would then be kind of creative already, right?
Yeah, and what we do is after analysis, we have another stage, which is strategy.
Okay.
So that is then really sort of the thinking about what we want to do after we've now understood the market, the analysis part. So the strategy part is more or less defining the roadmap and the guardrails. So these are more or less the parameters that we need to work in, whether it's budget, whether it's target audience, whether it's creative parameters, and of course the timing. Timing is a very important part. And then once the strategy is defined, then the work really starts also for coming up with new ideas.
Okay. And how can I visualize it? Maybe how do you really then decide which platform or basically the where? Mm-hmm. You already mentioned you look at the competition, you look at basically your own abilities, then you look at your target group. Is there something that for us, we always try to give the listeners some kind of, let's say, a plan that they can follow. Mm-hmm. And usually what people say who come from small companies, they always say, or at least most of the people who are in the online business, they have either the goal of bringing people to their website or converting those people into customers, basically. And then most of the times they start with first define your objective, then define your target group, and then basically just create something and test it. So it's really a short, simple process.
Sure.
But I think most of the people can learn really a lot from you about the whole topic of analysis. So really looking at data, coming up with hypotheses and then testing those.
Yeah. I think the first place to start is always what has worked in the past, or what hasn't worked in the past. We always try and look at the best cases from the past and build on that. But it's as valuable to look at what didn't work. So I think before, in the strategy phases and the analysis phase leading up to the strategy, it's very important to always look at what happened in the past, because we always think this is something completely new, it's never been done before. I think it's mostly has been done by someone or by yourself even in the past. So the best is always to look at the real results, the real numbers, right? So what worked and what didn't work. And I think that is such an important thing to do in before you get into the actual doing part, is just looking at what worked and what didn't. And some organizations do that differently. You talked about the testing. I think that's a very interesting approach. I think big companies like ours don't necessarily work that way, but I know there are other advertisers where they do less of the analysis and less of the strategy and more or less just start testing. That's a very interesting idea, and that is also analytics. So if you think of A/B testing, we can test many things at the same time, whether it's the website, whether it's the results of the website, whether it's just the content on the website. You can test a lot, but that is also analytics. So basically looking at what is working, why it is, putting down hypotheses and testing them at the same time. So I think there are different ways to get it, but I think the most important question is, what do we know from the past and what has worked and what hasn't.
So then let's assume that you looked at the past and saw, okay, maybe it didn't work to be in TV. Would it be like a statement like this, or how would you define? Okay.
It could be that. It could be something like, and it's very difficult to, of course, prove that TV didn't work. But the hypothesis could be that in this campaign, we should think about not including TV. So that could be one hypothesis. So it could be that the channel mix should be more focused on direct response channels like digital channels. So it could be a hypothesis that the teams work on to say, okay, well, that's our hypothesis. Let's check it against the history from campaigns that we have had in the past or activities that we had in the past. And it's then up to that team to prove or disprove that hypothesis.
Okay.
So sometimes it's also necessary to actually do it to prove it didn't work. And of course, that's also possible. But we try to let's say, answer a lot of those hypotheses or give a real result on them based on really a lot of analysis.
So there must be also really kind of like an open discussion culture, because I always assume it must be really hard if you're in a company or in a meeting and someone has to say something like, I think we should exclude this and this channel because it didn't work the last time. Someone really has to have the guts to speak it out, right?
I think guts help a lot, but I think numbers work harder or speak harder.
Good. Okay, that's good to hear.
And I think the whole idea, the way I personally also see data-driven marketing going, is this combination of guts, meaning experience and having done it before, but also looking at the real numbers. So I think this whole idea of data-driven marketing is also going much more in the direction of analysis. So we talked about historical analysis, but then once the campaign is running, there's also a lot of analytics that can be done to optimize the ongoing campaigns.
Can you share maybe some of the analytics? I think most users, at least in our small field, they would always think of something like conversion rates or click rates. And I think that might be for you similar or maybe totally different.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, those are indicators. Click rates or view-through rates are very good indicators of what is working. That is true. What I think we are doing, and many other big advertisers, where we want to be a little bit more scientific even, or let's say get a little bit deeper into that. One of the areas that is growing a lot is multi-touch attribution modeling. So one of the problems that one has if you look at customer journey. So, we know that consumers, when they buy products like ours and let's say more complex products, that isn't necessarily picking the toothpaste from the shelf that I always buy, where there's a little bit more thinking, a little bit more research, a little bit more analysis
Also
from
more
their
risk
side
involved, right?
Exactly. We know that consumers take a little bit longer, so that's why we talk about consumer journey. So there's always a process from, I think I need a new phone, or I would like to have a new phone, or I want to renew my contract, or I want to look for a new contract. Those are often triggers, and then up to the point where that actually happens, there's time, right? So there's also steps that happen in between. And if we look at, let's say, very basic analysis that you can do with web analytics, for example, it will tell you before the customer, for example, bought a product online, where they were, where that click or where that buy, that sell came from. So it could be from search, it could be from a website visit, etc. But it doesn't tell you what the customer or the consumer did before.
Yeah.
So what did they do yesterday or last week or 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe 3 months ago, if we think of a car, just to go back to the car analogy. Also longer journeys, people look, they go for test drives, they look online, they ask their friends, then they go to social media and see what people are writing about the vehicle. So this is a much longer journey than just, I think I'm going to buy a car tomorrow. It doesn't quite work that way. So what we're trying to do with multi-touch attribution modeling is try and stitch together those touch points, those digital touch points along the journey. And this is very, very interesting, because then all of a sudden you start seeing patterns. You see people, we are now talking about, of course, digital touch points. So we're talking about users, IDs, etc., cookies. But we see patterns within the behavior behind those cookies. So the people that are exhibiting this behavior. So there are very interesting patterns, and you can see what is working and what isn't. So what isn't. And that can also be used to optimize. So it's not just before the campaign planning or afterwards, it's also during. So that sort of real-time optimization is becoming very interesting, and it's becoming more complex.
So I think, what I can really now extract for the listeners is, first of all, the objective of a campaign. Then second of all would be the analysis, but also kind of illustrate or map out the customer journey to really see where does my customer or my potential customer actually get in touch with me, and how can I at each point of those steps maybe deliver a good experience or even deliver value, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's also interesting because people often talk about this offline, online purchasing. So where do people buy our products? Where do people buy products in general? And I think I'll just use mobile contracts and cars as a good example, because I think we all can imagine that. So, let's say rewind 5 years ago, people were saying, okay, we're going to just sell everything online. People are going to buy our products online because it is a digital product. People know how to buy our products. Yeah, maybe they want to compare phones. They can do that online. They want to compare packages and data. Do they get data unlimited, etc. All of that kind of stuff. They're going to do it all online. We're going to just sell online. Fast forward 5 years. Has that happened? No, it hasn't. Yeah. And I think that's also very interesting, and a very interesting phenomenon to see, that people still want that offline experience. They also want to speak to someone. They want to make sure that the product will work in the way that they want to. Cars, again, people want to go and drive the car. They want to speak to the salesperson. They want to have that interaction. So I think that online, offline world, how that works as well, is very, very important. So it's important to say that sales will always have a combination of these two. So what we see, for example, in our sales, although most people still buy our products in store, almost all go online in that journey. So that
compare maybe, or
to compare, for example, or to look at, I can't remember which package am I on again, so they might even look into their account, how much are they paying per month, I'm not sure what the features are. They look at features of phones, they look at features of packages, to compare, to ask their friends, to see what other people are writing. So that online journey the journey is very important, and that journey is not only an online journey. I think that's the other point to say.
Is it easy to track? To maybe connect even to those?
No, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to connect the online and offline world. That's very, very difficult. So you can track a lot online and you can track a lot offline, but to stitch them together is very difficult, especially in Europe, and I personally find it a good idea with GDPR and very strict data rules. I'll just give you an example what I've seen on some YouTube videos that happens in another country, not in Europe, as where they, for example, do tracking, face tracking. It's not allowed in Europe, let me just say it's not allowed, but I have seen it in other countries where they do face tracking with Facebook. So a person comes into the store and there's a camera that says, oh, this is Jan, and he is not a customer. So there's a link to say, this is that person, and a check with the system, so he's not a customer. Okay, so then the salesperson knows not a customer, this is the kind of services
also
I should offer him. Exactly,
That's
real
crazy,
time.
yeah.
Or the person comes in, it's Denise, oh, she's a customer already, this is the contract she has. So when you then start talking, they know where you are. This is very valuable, you can imagine, but in Europe that's not possible. So of course there are links between the number of sales, for example. So you can look at, I'll just give you an example. There's a very strong correlation between TV advertising and search queries. Doesn't sound that logic, but it's proven in our business and many other businesses that's true. So that's a way to link TV ads with online behavior. It's not, of course, possible to say, oh, this person who did this search saw the TV ad. That's not possible, right, because of this linking. But of course you can see the trends and you can see the volumes. And that tells you a lot. So for example, if you have an ad on TV tonight at 8:15 and you have 20,000 visitors to your website within the next 3 hours, you could say, oh, well, there was definitely an effect because last night I didn't have an ad at 8 and I didn't have 20,000 that went to my website within 3 hours. I only had 1,000. So the ad must have had a very big effect on the TV ad must have had a very big effect on the search behaviors because I did something different. So this is the kind of analysis that you can do, even on a basic level. But there are, of course, providers out in the market that are doing this kind of stuff on a quite high advanced level.
It makes also sense what you said about the testing. Of course, then when you look at the patterns, then it's really hard to, you can maybe compare, but it's really hard to do an A/B test with TV commercials when in the end you have to follow a trend or a pattern.
Exactly.
Whereas, okay, yeah, that makes perfectly sense for me.
So I think the world of analytics, sorry for the, is for me very interesting because it's bringing in a lot more of the science and the data side to marketing. You know, I come from I'm a marketing person. I've worked in marketing my whole life. And when I started in marketing, there was none of this kind of stuff, right? It was all gut feeling. Oh, I think this could work. Oh, we did something like that 2 years ago. Yeah, let's just try it again. Or, let's do it the same way. That seemed to have worked. Oh, people like that ad. Let's do something like that. I mean, this is where we were 20 years ago now. Fast forward 20 years and we're in a completely different world. Where there's so much data available, there's analytics to help us before the campaign is part of the planning and the strategy, and then of course during the campaign and afterwards, of course, as well. And that's a lot of work is being done as well to say, okay, the campaigns ended or the activities ended, the event, you talked about events earlier, what did it bring? Did it work? What should we do different next time? So.
Do you think this whole state of analytics right now is pretty advanced? Or because I think most of the times in Germany we still hear that most of the marketing is still done on gut feelings, and this whole digital trend or looking at the analytics first or analyzing what has worked or not is not almost or always done based on numbers.
I think it needs to be a combination, right? So we don't want to become little robots that just follow numbers and let the machines do all the thinking. I think that's not necessarily what we want either. But I agree with you that I think there's still a lot of room for improvement to make things more data-driven, make more hard facts, and to include that and to combine that with experience as well. I once heard that someone said marketing is not about riding a speedboat. So a speedboat is all about fun and winding your hair and sort of just not really following a route, not really checking the data, just sort of, going where the wind takes you. Marketing is not like that, or marketing shouldn't be like that. Marketing should be more like being the captain of a super tanker. So you guys know these huge ships that carry containers all over the world, 40,000 containers somewhere. So he needs to know what he's doing. He needs to have experience as a skipper, as someone who knows the sea. But there's so much data that's available now that if he doesn't follow that, weather patterns, the sea, I don't know, all this kind of stuff, routes that other boats have taken that has worked, that hasn't worked, all these kind of things. So there's so much more available now that he can't be the crazy guy on the speedboat, right, with 40,000 containers that he needs to take to China in 5 days. So I think we are definitely changing from the speedboat driver to the captain of the supertanker.
So then how do you find, or looking back at the patterns you mentioned, looking at the data, how do you find those patterns? Is it, because I always assumed it also must be first based on gut feeling maybe, or then on past experience where you look at first?
Yeah, that's also an interesting question. I think more and more is being done automatically. So when we talk about digital marketing and marketing in general, automation is one of the biggest buzzwords that we have at the moment. So what does automation really mean? It means a lot of things that we used to do manually. Think of Excel, which was the ultimate manual tool, and now a lot of it is being done by algorithms and by machine learning. So and what these machines and algorithms do, they look for things that don't make sense, right? Things that is unusual. What we see, for example, is promotions has a very big effect, for example, on sales. But a machine doesn't necessarily know that there was a promotion. So the machine goes, oh, there was something strange here, because all of a sudden you did everything normal, but then there's a whole lot of sales here. What happened there? So then it's also the knowledge of the people and the experience to say, okay, well, there was a promotion, 50% off on some devices, or the launch of the new Samsung came in, that week or something. So there were a huge amount of activity that we couldn't predict. So I think algorithms and machine learning has a lot to do with it. Also, crunching the amount of data we're talking about. So this is billions of impressions, billions of activities, billions of things that happen on a daily basis. It's not really doable by humans unless you have a lot of people that just sit there and do that, which is not cost effective. So a lot of it is done by machines, and again combined with human knowledge and human experience. That's the way it's going, and that's the way we're using it as well.
Cool. So my next question would actually be, looking at the social side of analytics, what do you think is the next big thing there? Because I think the first big thing was actually starting to use them, and now maybe people starting to get creative or finding new ways to connect different parts of analytics.
Yeah. I think that's exactly the point. I think it's connecting different parts of it. So if you look at the typical website analytics tools that are out there, look at how sophisticated they've become. One can really just, if you have a website and you're trying to get people on your website, or get them to do more on your website, stay longer, watch more videos, or buy more, I think with web analytics you can really learn a lot. So that's definitely the first place to start. As you guys know, it's become much cheaper over time to use these tools. They're very accessible and they're very easy to use. So I think that's the first part. And then I think the next part is to start connecting more and more aspects to it. One example, for example, is connecting the ad server with the analytics part. So analytics tells you who came to your website and what they did and how long they stayed, but it doesn't tell you which ads they saw, for example, or which ads was in their journey. So then immediately you're in this sort of journey thinking, and the ads are all the ads played. So I think your question is perfectly positioned, because it is about then connecting more and more data sources with each other. Yeah.
Has it, for me, now I'm just shooting out questions that I thought of while we were actually talking. For me, actually pretty interesting as well was, you probably worked on a lot of campaigns. how does it feel like when you actually see one yourself? It might probably happen a lot, right? I mean, because for us, I do a lot of campaigns on Facebook here, but then I don't see them that often because it's just a whole like totally different than when you see a TV ad or you see, let's say, something on Facebook, you see something on YouTube or something.
I'm just like very glad that it actually is there. It's like, thank goodness. It's over. No, not really. Yeah, there's definitely a huge amount of satisfaction to say, okay, well, that's something we worked on for a long time, and there was a lot of discussion, a lot of work around it, and now it's really live. And even better than that is, it's really working, right? Yeah. So that's the other point as well. So being live is good, but working is for me more satisfaction.
Okay. So maybe on a short personal level, does it sometimes happen that you see an ad, let's say with someone else, and the person reacts to the ad, and you're observing how the person reacts to the ad that you kind of were involved in, and then you... Yeah. I mean, it's only one opinion, and in the whole scheme of things, it doesn't make sense. Yeah. But
I must be honest, I sometimes also worry about how much advertising is valued these days. You know, we often talk about ad blockers, for example, people actively excluding advertising. You know, I don't know about you guys how you watch TV, but if I look at myself, and one should never only look at yourself, right? That's the research magic. Don't think of yourself as the target audience. But you know, I've watched very little live TV, so it's all you know, TV streaming exactly. So then I'm thinking, you know, I don't see many ads anymore, and that also worries me a little bit because I'm in this industry, right? This is my business, and sometimes I do worry a little bit about it that people are actively trying to cut out ads. People are trying to ignore ads. There's a lot of discussion within the online digital space, as you know. What is the value of ads, of banners, for example? Is it just irritating people, or does it have a value? And I think we're not asking those questions enough, Jan. You know, how can we make advertising more valuable to people? Yeah. How can we bring them the information they want? Because people don't necessarily hate ads. Yeah. They say, well, ads bring me more information, I understand more, I see products that I wouldn't have known about, or services. There's value in it, right? And I think we're not talking enough about that. What is the value that advertising is bringing, and how can we make that visible to people as well?
I always feel like that we have in Central Europe, or maybe because of this new data law, sometimes also this discrepancy of that people are annoyed by ads that are not relevant to them, but then if the ads are super relevant to them, then they also kind of are scared that it's too relevant.
Scared. It's a bit creepy,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
I looked at this kind of product on this site yesterday, and now I see the ads all the time. Yeah. And I think there's a very fine balance between, why am I seeing this ad? This is not relevant. I don't have kids, so why am I seeing ads for diapers? You know, that's a sort of classical thing. You know, there's a fine line between that and feeling creepy that, oh my word, you know, they know everything about me, or, you know, these big social media platforms are, you know, following me, that
or
kind
listening
of stuff.
to actually
or listening
my
to
voice,
exactly. Or
I
think there was that issue of people thinking that their cameras being used, you know, that they're being filmed or something. So I'm thinking, I don't think so, but anyway. Yeah. So I think there's a balance between it, and we need to think about ads a lot more, and the content of ads. There's the where question, but also the what. They both come together. You know, is it something that's adding value to people's lives, or is it just wallpaper?
Yeah. I've one final question, actually. What kind of big campaign are you working on right now? What is coming next?
Oh, I'm not allowed to say.
Okay.
I'm not allowed to say. I think that's also something interesting, of course, for big companies. We try and keep it very, very secret, always out of fear for our competition, right? Yeah. So we all work in very competitive markets. So our products need to be, you know, differentiated. We want to communicate about them in a differentiated way. So we try and say very little about what we're working on. But of course, you know, there's always the next big campaign. There's always Christmas that's not so far away.
Okay.
So there's big stuff coming.
That's actually one more question. Talking about Christmas,
Yeah.
one thing we always communicate about in the podcast is that we
Yeah.
look at the state of marketing or digital marketing.
Yeah.
I feel like most of the trend goes into being super time specific. I feel like when I was growing up, it was maybe Christmas or something like the Soccer World Cup.
Yeah.
But now it's getting way more. Sometimes it's an intermittent video that's only popular for 2 days,
Yeah.
and there are whole campaigns from big corporations based on that.
Yeah.
How is it possible to do that in that speed?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I think that's really driven by social media, right? So it didn't really exist before, because let's say the big events like Christmas and World Cup, when it's coming, so you can plan, right? So I think that's true. But I remember a few years ago when one could still achieve huge amount of reach, organic reach, through your Facebook page. Remember those days long ago?
Yeah, I remember
that I think was really the big point where that sort of that changed for a lot of brands and a lot of big advertisers. They could, for very little money, get huge amount of reach, and the trick then was to get lean and to get agile. So I think that's how companies then learned how to respond very quickly with short trends, or very short things that happen just for a few days or for a few hours, as you say. So I think companies learned through that experience that it is needed to be much quicker and respond much quicker. It's not easy, definitely, but I think companies like ours have become much better at doing many things, and one of them is to be more agile and have smaller teams that work on smaller things and bigger teams that work on big things. So I think there's been a big shift in saying, okay, well, we can't only work on these big campaigns that take 3 or 4 months. We also need to have other teams that work in a much smaller and agile way. And literally, if you think also of the role of social media in the service, providing service and service feedback to customers. We have a very successful platform here in Germany called Telekom Hilft, where it's there are service people, telecom people involved, but also consumers helping consumers, right? Yeah. So I think that is very interesting, and I think it's a great development to show also the value of social media and the internet in general. So it's not just about one-way communication. You need to ask telecom if you have a problem. You can just ask someone else that had the same problem or is happy to help people. So I think that for me is a great progression and a great way to show that how the digital world can also help people in a very small way.
Do you think it will more go in that direction, that people kind of solve their own problems?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. I think so. I mean, I don't want to mention any names, but have you ever tried to phone one of these very big internet-based companies? It's more or less impossible to get through, right? True. So they've also taught us how to do it. You ask people first, or you look online for an answer, and I think this is working extremely well if you think of how much information is available on YouTube on how to solve problems, technical problems, very technical problems you can solve within a few minutes. So I think it's a natural progression to people help people and technology help people as well.
Cool. Wow. I think I'm through with my questions. Is there one final advice you want to give to all digital marketers out there?
Yeah, I think digital marketing is certainly the future of marketing. I think there is, in my mind, absolutely no question about it. I think we need to relook the definition of digital marketing. It is much broader than it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So yes, it's still search, yes, it's still display, but there's so many other aspects. Yes, it's still social media, but there's so many aspects. And what I find particularly interesting is how non-digital media are becoming digital. And I think once you look at it from that perspective and see where the journey's going, then I think those that are in digital marketing should just stay there and develop their skills and be ready for a bright future.
And you also think that advertising or marketing itself still has a future, because we just talked about that people are kind of avoiding it.
Yeah, I think so. I think the the avoidance is a problem and we need to solve it, but I think the bigger trend is certainly that there's still value in it and people see value in it. And I think we as marketers need to find a way to make sure that people continue to see it as valuable and not as irritation.
Cool. Thanks. Wow, that was fun.
Great.
First podcast English. How was your first podcast?
Well, it was cool. It's a great environment and it was very informal, so I enjoyed it.
Is it different than speaking on a stage, basically two people?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Because you're kind of speaking to an audience, but you don't really see them, right?
Exactly. There's not much feedback,
Yeah.
and it was great to have you asking questions and responding as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.
For me, it was really fun to have someone. First of all, you're the first person who I talked to from a really big company that everyone kind of knows the products of. And for me, it was really interesting to kind of learn the bigger picture thing. Because I also realized at least 5 times that we're really looking at small pictures, at only indicators or at one specific problem. But it's really interesting if you then look at the whole customer journey from start to finish, or looking at let's say the whole problem at all and not simply the small steps.
Yeah, and I think the thing is always what I've learned in my more than 20 years in this career is it is not either or.
Yeah.
It is not saying we should do digital or radio. It is how they work together, how they all work together. Even print, which people don't necessarily want to talk about, but is alive and well in some instances. But I mean, it has changed as well. And there's a role for each of this media. I'm not saying in every campaign, but in a lot of big, large campaigns, there's a role for each media because they each have a different function. Okay. And I think what we need to start thinking about is how they work together. That is where the magic comes and not the either or question.
Those are great closing words for me. Then thanks for being here,
Thanks.
Gerhard Louw. Have a safe journey home, and I will, I think, now at least say 2 sentences in German again to make the audience feel familiar.
Thanks, Jan.
Ja, danke fürs Zuhören. Das war der erste Call-to-Action-Podcast hier von Digital Beat auf Englisch. Ich hoffe, es hat euch gefallen. Wie immer, wenn ihr ein Feedback habt, dann schreibt gerne podcast@digitalbeat.de. Wir freuen uns natürlich zu hören, ob euch das gefallen hat auf Englisch, ob wir weiter solchen Content bringen sollen. Und ich hoffe, ihr habt natürlich alle was gelernt, um wirklich mal zu verstehen, wie funktioniert es bei einer riesigen Firma. Und ich fände es sehr interessant, dass es am Ende wesentlich logischer und wesentlich dynamischer und schneller funktioniert, als ich mir das vorgestellt habe. Ihr könnt uns gerne eure Meinung sagen und dann bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss.